It's a question that is pressing and is an important one to ask. How should the developers of the Final Fantasy VII Remake go about developing the rest of this, not even trilogy, that's well out of the question at this point, but whatever you would call it, whether it's a trilogy, a quadrilogy, or a series of 5 games, 6, what is the best way for them to go about doing this? And there's a couple of possibilities, and this wouldn't be the first time we've seen a game broken up into several different chapters over a relatively short period of time. So for some, I guess, past history to look to, and so far as what Square Enix has done, we can obviously look at entries in the Final Fantasy series, such as Final Fantasy XIII. It had 3 separate entries, and of course those were all developed from the ground up, with different stories and concepts that had to be remade every time. Now, they're not going to have the same level of difficulty with this for the remakes, except if they do anything like they did with the first part that they made. It's basically going to mean that the rest of the remakes are going to all heavily add to the story, if not, in some places, completely change what happens. And that's going to be interesting to really look at. But from what I can tell, it's going to be interesting. So, I'm forgetting who on the Final Fantasy team at Square Enix, whatever they call it, I forgot who at Square Enix said this, but they essentially said that they're probably going to try and split it into even smaller parts than they were originally intending, just so that they can keep up the momentum and they can keep releasing games and not have people wait 2 years for each chapter to be re-released, which, first of all, that doesn't even make sense, because there's no way at this point that the game should take that long to be released, right? Because one of the main holdups, of course, was that, if I recall correctly, one of the main reasons why the game originally was so delayed was because of the fact that there were simply issues with the original engine they tried using, or really making, because if I recall, they made their own engine originally, and it just was not working for them. So they switched engines, I believe, I think they switched to a more already established engine, I believe, and they basically had to restart their development, essentially. So that's what, if I recall correctly, happened, at least when it comes to why this game took so long to come out. But for the future installments of the game, I don't feel like it should take multiple years for them to come out at all. And I also feel like they shouldn't need to be, they shouldn't need to be so split up anyway, because it's like, you already have the source material. Whatever new stuff you're going to add, it should be relatively easy to add whatever, small amounts of additional story you're going to add, and then you're just basically putting in the assets where they belong using the engine you make. I'm very sure it's much more complicated than that, but it's basically simplified. Because the original issue with the first game taking so long was because of the game engine, and them having to switch it. But that's no longer the case. So for some precedent regarding, a game being released in small chunks, not necessarily even sequels, just one whole cohesive story. A good example of this would be the .hack series. There are 2 main mini-series on the PS2, at least that were released in America. You had the original .hack, which was like Infection, Quarantine, and I think 2 other ones. These were released around 2002, 2003. And then you had the other one that was released in like 2005, 2006, and it was like .hack GU. And so essentially what these games were, they were if I recall correctly, they were released. There were like a set of 3 or 4 games released in each case. They were released over the span of about a year. And so, you know, you would play them in order and you would import your save file from the previous game into the new one. So hopefully Final Fantasy takes that approach. The problem that I see, even if they take an approach like that, and they manage to do it in a cost-effective manner, or rather, excuse me, if they manage to take an approach like that, do it in an efficient manner where they can tell the whole story that they want to tell, the problem they're going to face is how much is this going to cost us in the end? Because if they make this game super expensive, then what's the point? Like if the game ends up being 4 $60 games, then who's going to want to buy that? I think because most people will just be, some people will be okay with just watching at that point. And I don't want to be in a world where it's okay to package up a single game, a remake that's incredible or not, into 4 different parts that are sold to us, you know, for full price. They're gonna have to basically make it to that. And this is only for our current situation. They'll have to do something like what Nintendo did with Fire Emblem Fates, where if you buy one game at full price, or if you have one of the versions available, you can get the other versions for a discounted price. But even with the pricing thing being sorted out, there's still the issue of what happens down the line. Like, are they going to, when they end up finishing the remake, are they going to release a bundled pack or just a game where it's all in one? And if that's their plan, why don't I just wait until they have that fully released? We've already waited, what, 5 years since it was announced? Doesn't seem like too much of an issue to me. So, I mean, personally, I'd rather do that. But again, let's say they don't do that. Then for the case of trying to play it, it's going to be even worse than trying to buy old PS1 games now. Because a lot of PS1 RPGs had 3-4 discs, and there's so many times when you're trying to buy them online and you see so many listings where it's like disc 1 only or disc 3 only. It's like, thanks, I guess I'll use this. Overall, I feel like this is going to be a weird thing they're going forward with. I mean, I understand why they're doing it like this. They put so much time into what was in the original 3 hours of the game, and they turned that into a meaningful anywhere from 20 to 100 hour game that the vast majority of people love. So it's not like they're shoehorning in this remake. They are doing it meticulously. That's another thing too. Like, it's not just graphically, right? It's everything. The design of the UI, the battle system, like everything. Like, because they did it like in this way, right? Like, they spent so much time making this battle system and making everything else. So now they have that structure going into making the next game. So the next games, you shouldn't need to, I guess, you shouldn't need to make them smaller chunks. But then that's another question, right? That also, now that I'm thinking about it, that pops up another question or issue with this, is how is this going to work? With part 2, are we going to start over from level 1? Are we going to, if we don't have a save file from the previous part, is it going to basically start us off at a random, like, level 30? Obviously, the obvious answer for if you've played the first part of the remake is you import your save data from there. There's a lot of questions regarding this. I hope Square gets it right. I mean, they certainly knocked the first part of the remake out of the park. It feels like they could have fit more than just Midgar, though, into the remake, but at the same time, they made it as good of a game as anyone could possibly hope it to be. So, we'll see what happens moving forward.